Good evening, folks. This time you will be hearing me as well as looking at my work. Tonight, with me, I have a friend from Texas. His name is Travis. He is going to be providing me company so I don't lose my train of thought or, in general, just to ask questions on what exactly am I doing on the screen. Speaking of the screen, let's go back to the program with which I'm modeling. Travis, good evening or good day.
Good evening, or yeah, good evening, buddy. Happy Halloween too, by the way.
Oh yeah, happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. So since it's Halloween, we I decided to do uh, some Halloween themed sculpting. So hopefully Travis will be giving me some ideas on what should I make and how should I make it, while I'm
Well,
describing my design process, building process, and whatnot. I will
well,
still be using my default program, which I'm using for modeling, which is called Creo Parametric. It's a solid program, but it costs a lot. Eventually, I plan on going to using FreeCAD, but in order to do so, I need to adjust my design workflow for FreeCAD and maybe even design a plugin because there's a feature in FreeCAD which I call a bug, they call a feature. It's a difference in opinions, nothing else. So given that the program is free, open source, and anybody can use it, and it works just as good as Creo, it truly is just a difference in opinions. Now, Travis, what would you like me to make tonight?
oh well, let's start with the traditional Halloween icon. Let's do a jack-o'-lantern,
So,
or maybe just a pumpkin.
a carved up pumpkin. So, how would I make a pumpkin? One of the best ideas I found for sculpting pumpkins before, since this 3D modeling program is not like Blender, you don't, use putty and just make things. I found that the best idea was to, since you need to start with the technical drawing from the beginning instead of, putting putty on the screen and just moving it about. Uh, Best idea was to actually make it in pieces. Make just one piece of the pumpkin, and then tell it to make multiples. So a pumpkin is actually not at the perfect circle. It's like a little oval. It's an ellipse. I don't know. Do you guys call it an ellipse or call it something different? And what do you call it? A jack o' lantern anyway.
Oof, beats me. I'm just a poor old Texas boy here, so I'm not sure where these names and terms of origins come from. I think it's tied to an urban legend or something, possibly about like possibly going all the way back to like the origins of Halloween or something.
Mm-hmm.
I always hear the joke that originally instead of using pumpkins, they used like turnips or something, which I don't think is even remotely true.
It's possible. Who knows? Uh, in my case, we don't have a tradition here in Serbia regarding Halloween. There is a saint day called Saint Luke's Day, which coincidentally falls on the same date, coincidentally under quotations, and the saint is a patron saint of, if I recall correctly, farmers and artists. If I also recall correctly, Halloween falls on All Hallows Eve, like a important date signifying pardon my English, I might stutter a little. Uh, it shows the end of autumn, the starting of winter, when we need to start gathering our crops, stuff like that.
Mm.
Uh,
Oh yeah, and here in the U.S., it serves pretty much the same sort of situation. I mean, I remember living out in the country, and that was basically it in terms of people performing harvest or doing anything out in the fields for the next several months until spring came back around.
hmm. So, I'm literally just making a slice of it, as you can see on the screen.
Mhm.
So I've actually made a crosscut of what will become a pumpkin, and I'm making a piece. So let's make it, well, 30 degrees in total. There'll be a lot of these. So, but if I just multiply these a lot of times, it will again be just a regular element. That's not what we need. We need to give it a little curve. So I will be rounding, not that. I'll be rounding this edge and this edge. Not by that much. I don't know how much you can see on the screen because I know there's a little lag between the actual display and what's going on my screen, but so far we have like a slice of a pumpkin, and now I'm gonna ask it.
Yeah, there's a little bit of just a small amount of lag, but I'm seeing what you're seeing so far. And it's interesting that you have to do it in slices in CAD, because normally, well, I'm somewhat well acquainted with Blender and 3D Maya, and
It's
generally,
literally the opposite approach. In Blender, you would make
right,
a ball and you would carve it out.
right,
Here,
exactly,
here I would need to tell it how to carve it out by drawing a line and like on a milling machine and telling it what to do. It's harder than this option.
right, correct. Or if you were going a simpler route, say for like a game asset or something that doesn't need to be looked at by the player all that much, you would just build it up from the base and kind of just use textures more than anything to kind of illustrate a pumpkin appearance.
That's one more important element between designing for a video game and designing for I forgot to save the model. Silly me. And designing a model that will be used later in production, because in video games, like just like you said, we use textures. Here you need to define every single feature you would want. Now the program itself is not exactly allowing me to actually how would I do this. Before doing this round part, I would actually after doing this round part, I would have selected this, and I would say a pattern. I would say please do an axis pattern over the z-axis, and I want if it was 30 degrees, so I need 12 copies at every single 30 degrees. That would be a full circle. He would complete a circle with a few missing elements,
right,
because they failed to generate. The biggest issue with making this way is the program will not let you combine elements which overlap. So a pumpkin, despite what we might think, is actually one of the more difficult elements to design or make this way.
Right.
If I would to make it the traditional way, so let's just say for the time being and create a new model on, and just call it pumpkin test. If I would just make a ball, there would be issues.
And what sort of issues would that be?
Well,
Just the overlap?
Well, in this case, I wouldn't have an overlap. So I'm gonna make a cutout of a ball, So just delete it, thank you. The scale is currently irrelevant, and I will just say rotate it and just make a ball. But here's the next question: how am I gonna do those little curves that the pumpkin has on it?
Little bumps.
Yeah.
Ooh, excellent question.
On Blender, you would just select the polygons and just shift them a little in. Here, I would need to actually draw a line on which I would have to say, please start curving in this line, and that would be by selecting the front, then saying, please let's create another sketch on this plane using the surfaces of the ball as a reference. I would again make another curve which is the same size as the ball. Delete this segment and this segment, so we just have a line, and then say okay, and then I would on the other element sketch a circle, for example, which stands on that curve, and I would say, please would you kindly sweep that thing in this direction and remove the material. And the sketch would be, well, he's asking me to do an additional sketch now, but the sketch would be the circle on the start. And I would get that. Then I would have to make a pattern of that on an axis, the vertical axis. Let's say every 30 degrees, 12 of them in total. He's gonna curve it 12 times. You're noticing I'm getting an error I'm not exactly going to know how to fix here now. And then now I would actually have to gently round up every single of these surfaces like this.
Oof.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
Inefficient. And
Inefficient.
Looking more, yes. No. Looking more like orange slices right now than.
Yeah, I would need to make this, and even then, it's not exactly looking like a pumpkin. It's looking like an orange slice, or maybe even a basketball.
Yeah.
Instead, let's go back to the original idea and just add up the slices.
And then adding up the slices, how's that going to help you with the bumps and the curves?
Because I already made the bumps.
So from there, you're just going to be bridging them together, kind of.
Yeah, see?
Okay.
I'm just gonna assemble them perfectly. So all I need to do now is to tell it in the assembler, I want this plane and this plane to be at an angle offset of 30 degrees.
Right. Okay.
Well, 150. Yeah, there we go. I need to do a little math in my head. So minus 30 degrees is actually where we want it. And then we need to add another and another and another and another until we get a pumpkin.
Right.
Since the main difference between parametric modeling in programs like this and just freeform modeling like in Blender is that while you do work the hard way around, you start with a technical drawing, it gives you a lot of other advantages which are great for production. So if you're planning on doing production models, Blender is actually hampering you a little. If you plan on doing models for animation, please don't use this. It will just give you additional work, not less work.
Right. And that's mainly the biggest difference between the two. Is one is Blender is definitely a more media-based creation tool. or
Uh,
animation or simple props.
there is one more major difference. The Blender has a lot of functions that these programs do, but one of the main functions it doesn't. I'm just coordinate myself here so that I know what I'm doing. So this one needs to be with this one at an angle offset of, please don't bork, thank you, not coincident. I need an angle offset of 30 minus 30, thank you, and then we continue this another 11 times. See this part here on the left where I'm adding part whatnots?
Yeah, the model tree.
Yeah, well, I can do this and then add something here and then just continue out back. But not just that, this is the assembler part of the program. If I go back to the actual pumpkin slice and edit its size, like drastically, this will update as well. Blender sadly doesn't have that, at least not in any function that I've found so far. If you need to edit something like 4 days later, which is in the middle of your design process, for example, you find out that the screws you wanted to use on a housing you were building are either not available or not recommended for that, and you need to make different holes for different screws. You cannot in Blender you cannot just go back and say, oh, okay, this function will be done with a different size. Here you can. But on the other hand, the more pieces you start adding into this program, into this element, that becomes more complex and more complex. I don't know, have you followed the APC I made? Basically, I had more fun in assembling pieces than actually making them, because all you need to do is add up the elements. And he's trying to render them now. Just give it a little time. This old bucket of my laptop is really trying its best. See, all the reference points he's showing, that's all the datum planes and all the different axes of each element added. If I ever decide to edit any of those elements, this whole assembly will be updated. But if I made this as a single piece in Blender and then I decide to, I don't know, change the orcish symbol I made here on the front, I will actually have to redraw it. I cannot just go back to the actual drawing of it. There it is. I can always open it and edit the actual cutout drawing. Let's say, for instance, we no longer want to have this entire tooth. See, it's gone.
Interesting. I appreciate that flexibility.
The downside is your design process needs to be continually in your head.
Right.
You need to map out, at least on a piece of paper, if not in your head, what are you planning to do, how are you planning to do it, and what steps you will be undertaking, because sometimes thinking as you work is not an option.
Right.
Now, while I assemble these, which is going to take some time, how much Blender experience do you have? Maybe you could teach me something, because I always had more ease with using these programs than when using Blender-like programs.
So my experience with Blender goes all the way back a couple of years or so. there's been some recent major updates and overhauls to the general Blender system
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't changed the hasn't changed the core of it, but it has changed like the layout, where everything is, etc., etc. Um, so one of the classes I took back when I was at TSCC, which was a small technical college, was a game design class, and we actually made a very short, very small game in Blender, or using assets made in Blender. This included animations, so I actually know the general process for making animations in Blender in terms of like 3D characters and such. There's a couple of a couple of new tools have been added to it to make it easier to do 2D animation in Blender, which is interesting, but not something I'd really say I'm skilled in doing yet. So that's always an option if anyone's ever curious about that. But yeah, my general knowledge of Blender comes to making simple props and such like that. And even that knowledge has kind of been uh, lost just a little bit due to transitions to newer systems.
Hmm. I've tried modeling in Blender, and one of my biggest desires are. One more second, please. I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong with this. Maybe I'll just delete this piece and start over. I want to become more proficient in Blender, so to say, because a lot of 3D models I find online are, well, as you said, made for animation. And there's a lot of prep work needed to be done to make them printer ready.
Right.
Especially regarding pieces. So there's a thing many people don't realize is that unless you have a really good resin 3D printer, you cannot print a whole model in just one piece. You need to cut it up like it's on a sprue, like the sprues we buy from our hobby escapades.
Right, and that's something that's nobody's thinking about when they make most of their 3D models in Blender, is like how it's actually broken up. It's just more of a one pass through, and then, I'm kind of done with that. You can add it into like a game or maybe the background of an animation scene or something like that. You can't take that out and print it and expect it to look good.
Sometimes you can't even print it at all because I've seen models which are. Well, here's another important difference people need to learn. I'm working with models which are called solids. So this entire surface is defined in one way or another. Well, it's not a surface; it's a volume, and this entire piece is defined in one way or another within the program on what exactly it is. You can even define the specific material it uses, and then use its parameters to even test whether you can cast this. That's why this method of building is called parametric modeling. In regular modeling, where you're working with polygons, this exactly isn't the case because you're just working with a mesh. But even in that case, you are defining a sculpture. I've seen many people who work with surfaces, who create a surface because they need an organic looking surface. Now, and I apologize in advance if somebody who is more proficient than me is listening or watching, if I mistake a definition or a term. But the end point is I frequently see a lot of models which are uploaded on websites for 3D printing, which are not models. They are surfaces not properly joined, which in an animation you can actually use to create something, but in 3D modeling the program would bork completely and wouldn't know what to do, because for the program it's surfaces surrounding an empty space and it wouldn't know what to do with it.
Right.
and I've had that happen so far twice. I wanted to start printing custom-made pieces for a Titanicus model. The guy who sculpted them under as surfaces. One program sees them properly, another one doesn't. So
Right. Very. Well, it's looking more and more like a pumpkin now, so. And then after this step, where are we going from here? Where are
oh,
we?
we're gonna carve it.
So how would we go about carving it though? Ooh.
It's a little oddly oriented. It's on top, and one of these pieces is a little oddly moved. So this piece
Yeah, a
is from
little
here.
peeking out there.
Let's. Problem is, you see that they're all purple. That is because they're not fully constrained. I can still do this. In order to avoid that, I need to now tell it that this plane and this plane need to be the same plane. Is informing me that there's an error. I say a distance and say 0. Unless then it will work. So let's go back to top. There are a few more which are a little sticking out or not. It's a weird pumpkin, but no pumpkin is perfect.
Just a little bumpy.
Just a little bumpy. It's still good.
And that's kind of some of the issues we ran into that in that class was some
And
of the
when
students in that class.
As you see, when I constrain it fully, it becomes yellow. It's not letting it move anywhere else.
So it's basically attached to
attached to another piece. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
While
so now,
for production, you're not exactly required to do that for 3D printing and our animation thingies. But for actual production, if we would need to make a technical drawing of this and to send it to somebody else, or God forbid this is a machine piece or an engine part which needs to have pieces moving in it, we would need to make sure all of that is working.
Your pumpkin mobile or something.
Yeah. So what do we need? We need to first save it just in case, and then let's start sketching on. Before we start sketching, we need a new plane. This new plane will be on the same angle as this plane,
right?
But it will have an offset of, let's say 60, let's say 200, not 20, 200. Yeah, it's way out. That's what we need, 150. And I want to be sketching on that plane. Let's turn this handy little button and turns the sketching surface directly towards us. So let's draw. What does it need? It needs an eye. It needs another eye.
A nose and a mouth.
Let's make it a little goofy. Needs a nose. And it needs a mouth. Now let's do some carving.
Now this plane isn't attached to the pumpkin object yet, right?
No, it isn't. It isn't at all. Which is and I'm kind of free drawing here, even though I don't need to. I'll have one weird teeth in the middle, who cares? There won't be any top teeth. And we need a curved smile. Now, you see these are purple, that means this is done right, but this isn't. If you want to do anything with a sketch, the sketch needs to be a fully closed surface. Purples indicate that the surface is closed. If you don't see purple, that means there's an error somewhere, and we have errors here because I free drawn lines over lines just to, you know, indicate roughly where something would be.
Right.
And now I have to delete all the excess segments. Now in a perfect drawing you see all these dimensions. I would actually need to define them and fix them up permanently, because if I don't, one little misclick can create this.
Ah, and that's...
However, if I actually fix a dimension, like say this is always 50, I can do whatever I want for this circle, but it will move only in the directions the program is allowing it to, not everywhere. That's the advantage of constraints.
Right. Very interesting. Very interesting.
So he's a little weird now, right?
Right.
I want to extrude this surface through him entirely, almost entirely. Let's go with 150. That's all the way to the middle, and it will automatically remove the material. That's the we cannot add materials in the assembler. If I wanted to add something, I would need to go in the part design workbench again. And when I'm finished with this, here we go. There's a little pumpkin.
Very nice. Very nice.
Now here's a little ripe pumpkin, so we didn't carve it up completely inside. Let's fix that by going back to the Halloween part and just undoing this thing here. This needs to be 80 or 85s. We carved it up real good. There we go.
And now it'll give it more hollowed look.
Yeah. I can remove these edges so that you see just the finished one, and here he is. Ta-da! Now
A very handsome jack-o'-lantern.
you might see a little error at some point. You see this line that shows up here?
Oh yeah.
That error is there because I forgot to constrain one of the pieces. I didn't tell it that it needs to be perfectly joined to the next one. I said, please put it at 30 degrees. So he's indicating that it's not touching it. In actual production, it will, because we know how big the piece is. But it's doing so that you know that its constraint is not regarding to the surface next to it.
Interesting. And is there a way we can fix that?
Yeah,
now
I would
that
need
we've done
to.
so much?
Yeah, I would need to select the piece. First, I need to find it. I think it's this one. That's from this one, and edit its positioning options. So his positioning options are that he is coincident to this surface. So placement. See, coincident. That one's good, but the ones before that have a little line. This one. So the one before that. That's one of the first ones. Sketch one has an issue. Unresolved references. And there we go. Update. Solve. close. Thank you. And we're done. When you edit a model, issues would appear. See, the sketch changed.
Yeah, his mouth is way more open now.
Yeah, because I didn't pay attention while drawing. One of the references was one of the surfaces inside. See, there's these little pieces. He's telling him to be parallel here and whatnot. So in reality, this happened. He's not letting me move it because this has this constraint. I actually need it here. This happened because I edited the model. And then every single other piece moved.
So now it's just about moving them back in their correct places. And
Roughly. And this, if while I was drawing was paying more attention to these all references, this wouldn't have happened.
right.
And the only reason this happened is because when I decided to either check the positioning of one of the slices or change the hollowness of it, I probably changed one of the parameters one of these lines was attached to. So in these programs, free drawing is non-existent. You need to actually tell the program to not automatically assign constraints, which is a little hard because in this sketch, you already see he automatically put a few. You know, he's placing this one on this vertical, placing this one on this vertical as well. This one is definitely on this horizontal line. I predefined the size by 210 by and 250 to be the ellipse. The center of it all needs to be in the center of the exact drawing. So the program is actually trying to help you by placing all these constraints. If you want to free draw and just have, you know, an object like which will you then edit like putty, this definitely isn't the program to use. You would need to use Blender. The disadvantage of that will be that if you want to edit something, you cannot edit it this easily. So it's literally just a preference of how your mind works and how you like to model it yourself.
Right. It's always a trade-off, so.
Yeah, it's always a trade-off. There is one more thing I want to do here.
And what would that be?
Did he not save that? I didn't tell it to close it. Oh, he's still in the sketcher. Okay, so I want pumpkin. Okay, please regenerate the model. Save it. I would like to again sketch on this surface. Well, actually not on that surface. We need a new surface, which is on an offset from this plane. We need to yeah, he's not getting a halo. No, he is. We need to. Well, we need to carve him up so that we can actually put a lamp inside, so that he could glow.
Right. Yeah.
And that's roughly it. These programs usually have. A rendering option as well, so that you can show it at least a little how will it look in reference. Now, since I wasn't checking on scale, the scale, and I was using millimeters, this thing, it probably is about the same size of a small pumpkin. Now with perspective turn on, we can actually see that. And I can add a mannequin to check if that's right.
You actually have a full scale.
That's one other advantage of these programs. They usually come with full scale mannequins automatically so that you can actually check the product you're designing. Since, like I said, this piece of software costs a lot of money, so it should come with a lot of advantages.
Right. Blender's a free program for those who don't know, so it's definitely
I believe that there are not only mannequins but already pre-made models for animation and whatnot, which are usually the scale of a human with a made skeleton. Yeah, you will see there are no skeletons in here. We're not working with animation parts, so that doesn't exist. But if you're working in Blender, it's not a bad idea to actually insert one of those as reference. To see, especially if you're making a product model or if you're making something that should be used next to human scaled elements. I saw a person put a picture of a space marine in actual scale on a flat surface while doing 3D modeling, so that when he is designing bits for his bases or alternate rifles for that scale, that he knows that they're still in the scale he wants them to use. Here I'm using millimeters, so I roughly know what I'm doing. But in Blender, the scale is one point. How big is that point? You defined it later on, or at any point of doing the design process. So you could keep it at just 1 point, or give it 1 millimeter, or give it 1 inch, or give it whatever scale you want to. Blender doesn't care. For Blender, that's 1 unit. Here you need to tell it in advance that it's millimeters, because the program is expecting that you will be working with an actual workpiece.
Yes, and that is one of the biggest curves I think a lot of first-time modelers have, especially when they're actually making it with the intention of putting it either in an animation scene, a product that's going to be printed out, or a game scene, is not knowing their scale when they begin working on it, or having even the closest idea of a scale. So going back to the game I was mentioning earlier, I created for that one class. We created level assets in Blender, no idea of scale, and it turns out, so it was just a brief little Roman Colosseum style pillars, just typical Greco-Roman style looking pillars. We bring them into the game scene, and it looks like the Mines of Moria, because these 6 pillars are so vast and huge that they dwarf our player character, and they can't see around them, so they almost block out all the lights.
So what color is the pumpkin? Something orangey.
Yeah, just not full on orange, but orange enough.
Something here.
Yeah, there we go. Had a couple of people jump in and out, so anyone new entering the chat, happy Halloween.
Actually, the inside is more
like a tan, like a much lighter color than orange.
So something like this.
Yeah. It's a little better.
Now, the reason why these surfaces are not colored is because they came into existence here. So I would need to color them up here. But coloring in this program actually In this workbench, colors an entire piece, not a surface. Let me show you. See, it will let me select this entire piece and color it, regardless of what I said inside. I would highly recommend using a separate rendering program than the one in which you're actually making 3D models. Programs for making 3D models are good at that. They're not usually good in rendering. Blender is the only program package I know which is trying to be a little bit of everything and trying to excel at it. And given that it's already in version 280 something and that it has gone through so many iterations and that it's already in a version where they have started really working on the user interface to be more user friendly, because versions before that were let's just not go there.
Yeah, no. As somebody who worked very hard in all those versions, let me just say, yeah, no, I completely agree.
Here's another thing a lot of people don't know about if you want this for production, especially for 3D printing. Most 3D printers don't take models from any 3D modeling program. You need to prep the model for working. So I would actually have to save this model as a completely different file. So I would need to save it not as an assembly file, but I need to save it as stereolithography. And I need to customize the export of the file so it doesn't become tessellated too much. So we actually want this to be as low as possible and this to be as high as possible. Here are your polygons. Ta-da!
Oof. Yeah, that's oof.
That's a lot of polygons, right?
Yes.
You need this for 3D printing, because if I didn't do this, all the curves will no longer be curves because of tessellation.
You need the exact opposite of this if you're making it for games or really even animation.
Exactly, and that's one of the biggest issues with 3D printing. Most of the 3D models you export from games are extremely low poly. You don't want a low poly model. You need the highest poly model ever. You need models that are made for movies, who are so detailed with the polygon count that you don't need textures. You just need to color the polygons. Because if you take a low poly model, the 3D printed model, well, of course it cannot print textures. It will just print the information of the surfaces, and you will get, well, you won't get a ball, you will get a polyhedral dice, which we don't need. And like you said, this is the exact opposite from animation, because in animation you want as few polygons as possible so that the computer can continually render it in real time.
Right. The most polygons you want is going to be on characters, because those are going to be the things that are the most animated, that are most like that the player's going to see, player, viewer, whatever is going to see the most of, and they're going to notice if it starts looking a little weird.
Yeah. Important to note, please guys, save your models as often as possible, because if I no longer can edit this model as long now when it's in this stage, when it's an STL, this program cannot work with it. Why? This is one of the reasons I want to learn Blender more. There are a lot of models which are in this condition, which I need to load into Blender and then fix the errors myself. I need to either make the model whole or cut off a piece because it's not supposed to be there, because my printer is too small to handle that size of an element. That's another part people need to address on when making models. Yeah. On the other hand, this program has another cool feature. Which isn't viewable properly here. We need to open the pumpkin again. Where are you? Since all of these pieces are actually assembled pieces, you can tell the program to disassemble it so that you can see the pieces independently. This will look a lot better on, say, I don't know, an APC. Now, while in exploded view, I can actually move every piece individually so that the user can get a better view of what's going on.
Interesting, interesting. And is it purely more because of because the APC, the vehicles are mechanical, and the pumpkin is supposedly a more natural construct? So
it's more a question of elements. The pumpkin, I could move the elements of the pumpkin even more too, but the whole idea of this view is to help users if this is a if this thing is a a piece you need to assemble, to provide them with an animation or a direction on how to actually assemble this. All those assembly instructions we get for our models from GW. This is how they're made.
right.
So you would actually put all the pieces together, you would put it into explode view, and you would just add arrows. This goes here, this goes here, this goes here, and you would just need to reposition the model so they are somewhere you can position those arrows a little better so that the user can see, and then just reassemble it. You can also tell the program to assemble it one step at a time, one piece at a time, to have sub-assemblies. For anybody who's wishing to work on 3D modeling, for miniature modeling, for sculpting, for that, you need to start thinking in this direction, because you will need to eventually go into plastic modeling and injection molds for making and for you to make models like that. You need to know how your model is assembled. You will need to manually insert and define your sprue or your elements on the sprue. You need to create the assembly instructions for your customers. So knowing how they're assembled and knowing how you can create an assembly instruction within your program. I'm hoping that Blender has this function. I know FreeCAD does, because FreeCAD is more oriented towards this type of design, even though its design bench has a contra-intuitive method of working than other programs. I'm not sure whether Blender has this or not, but this will be very useful for anybody who wants to make a model from multiple pieces and to instruct anybody how to assemble it. I can even open up the building I made on the first and second stream, which is again made from several parts. This is just the ground floor. Oh, we don't need that one. We need the assembly one. Oh, it just has the mannequin. No. The full building. So here I can even show you in how many. Well, they're all separate pieces because I added several floors. And I can just reassemble them back up so that you can see a full building. You can always reposition this. If you have a client who needs to see what are you doing, making an animation like this to show them how it all fits together is always a cool way of selling your product. Trust me, it works every time.
No, it's definitely a cool visual. Are there any sort of issues you run into, like working in Exploded?
You don't work in exploded view. You just use it to see if everything is everywhere where it's supposed to be. Unless we're making a model which has moving parts, like I don't know, a toaster, a chainsaw, a vacuum cleaner. You can, in most of these programs, whether it's Creo or SolidWorks, you can actually position cables for electrical wiring and put rotating pieces and motor parts and cogs in there. You can test whether everything's moving smoothly, and you'll eventually come up to a lot of parts, like thousands of parts. In those cases, you need the exploded view to see, for starters, did you put everything in the model to test it? Because when it comes to 1,000 parts, you start forgetting.
Right.
Well, I was hoping we would be making something else. I mean, I can make a tombstone-like feature that's rather easy to make. Unlike the pumpkin, I just need to make a single surface and extrude it.
We could make it like a time challenge or something. I could hit a timer and see how fast it takes you.
Well, it's kind of unneeded because it's purely artistic. You just tell me, do you want a curved tombstone or a square tombstone? Or
Well, let's do it curved. Give you a little challenge.
Okay.
I would assume that the square one would simply just be a box.
Not really. You can always add elements to it, improve the liking of it a little. It's always good to put your initial piece right smack center of where you want to work with. So.
And for reference, for those of you curious how to do it in Blender, it would be almost even easier in Blender. It would just be take the default cube and twist it to a shape you want, a rectangle you want, and then...
Well, since I don't want to... This is where constraints come in handy. I want this to be tangent to this. Now I know that it's a straight angle here. And I didn't want a piece of a circle. I want like an ellipse. And now I can fix this up here to be 140 specifically. I can delete this entire segment now because I no longer need it. And then I need to put a center line as reference. This is just a line for construction work. And then I can select this and say I want to mirror it around that center line. And just delete this symmetric part, and let's put this to be a little smaller.
That's an interesting shape.
Yeah, it happened because I never defined this distance. I can't exactly define it even if I wanted to. I would need to reposition the points on the curve. But I will have to do that before the mirroring, which I really don't want to do that now. So let's increase its size then. See what I forgot? I put this constraint here, but I didn't put it here, so it's a little... I want this to be sure, and I want this to be 90 degrees. Now we don't have any odds, bumps, or anything. So just extrude it for like 40, too thin. Let's go with 80. And then sketch on it and put a little engraving. Another hefty thing is I can now put references here. And then I can just draw a line all the way up here and a line all the way up here of the equal length is this, and then just draw an arc and another one. And then just finish up the line here. You notice that he's giving me red squares where the lines split up.
Yeah.
And he's also alarming me if there are multiple constraints, like in this case. I put a point on entity here, and I need to delete that. Because I actually want this to be 125. Now it's definitely centered. And now we are gonna carve that up. So in this direction, but for just 20. Now, to get back onto the story of constraints, if I, for any reason, would decide to edit this fully, he'll edit the sketch as well. That's a little big, right?
Yeah, it may not fit on there. There we go. A little smushed though.
We edit that by editing this. That's it for tonight, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Have
Have
fun.
a safe one.
And I'll be seeing you all on Monday, where I'm going to be trying to model a building from Vancouver. Oh, I apologize for butchering the Canadian city's name in an hour and a few minutes. Hopefully I can make it. See ya, everybody.
Bye.